You can tell a lot about a person by what they do in the first 10 seconds after meeting you. But sometimes, those 10 seconds can cost you the truth. The maitre d' glanced toward the entrance just as Victoria Hayes stepped into the restaurant. Conversation softened. A few heads turned. She was the kind of woman people noticed without trying. CEO of one of the fastest-growing software companies in Chicago, featured in business magazines, invited to leadership conferences, admired for her intelligence and feared for her standards. Tonight, however, she wasn't here to close a deal. She was here for a blind date. Victoria checked her phone and looked around the dining room. The table reservation matched. The man waiting for her stood when he saw her. Ethan Walker offered a polite smile. No expensive watch. No designer suit. No flashy confidence. Just a simple navy button-down shirt, slightly worn jeans, and the calm posture of someone completely comfortable being overlooked. "Victoria?" he asked. "Yes." She sat down carefully, studying him. "You're Ethan?" "I am." A brief silence settled between them. Ethan noticed the quick glance she gave his sleeves, his shoes, and the old pickup truck keys resting beside his water glass. He had seen that look before. Most people never realized how much they revealed without saying a word. "So," Victoria said, forcing a small smile, "what do you do?" "Mostly spend time raising my daughter. And for work, I manage a few things." The answer wasn't impressive enough for her. She expected details. Titles. Achievements. Something. "A few things?" she repeated. Ethan nodded. "Enough to keep life moving." Victoria leaned back. The disappointment arrived faster than she expected. The dating profile had described him as successful, thoughtful, and family-oriented. She had imagined an executive. A founder. Maybe an investor. Instead, sitting across from her was a quiet single father who seemed entirely uninterested in advertising himself. Around them, soft jazz drifted through the dining room. Crystal glasses reflected warm golden light. Outside, downtown Chicago glowed beneath a cool spring evening sky. Ethan remained relaxed. Victoria became increasingly distant. "I don't mean to be rude," she finally said, checking the time on her phone. "But I don't think we're looking for the same things." Ethan simply nodded. "That's fair." The absence of resistance surprised her. "You're not going to ask me to stay?" "No, why not?" Ethan smiled gently. "Because people should be where they want to be." For a moment, something about that answer unsettled her. Then her pride returned. She stood, collected her purse, and offered a professional smile. "Well, good luck, Ethan." "You too, Victoria." She walked away without looking back. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Ethan remained seated for a few seconds before reaching for the check. As he stood, a young valet hurried through the front doors. His eyes immediately found Ethan. "Good evening, Mr. Walker," he said respectfully. "Would you like the usual vehicle brought around?" Ethan smiled. "Not yet. I'm waiting for someone." The valet nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." Across the street, Victoria paused at the curb while waiting for her rideshare. Her gaze drifted toward a row of extraordinary vehicles parked beneath the city lights. A deep red Ferrari. A silver McLaren. A black Pagani that looked like rolling artwork. People stopped to take pictures. Others stared through the windows in admiration. Victoria glanced at them briefly before looking away. To her, they were simply expensive cars owned by strangers. She never noticed that every valet near the entrance kept glancing toward the restaurant door. And she never imagined that every one of those supercars belonged to the quiet single dad she had just left behind. Sometimes the people who understand value best are the ones who have already lost something money can never replace. The following afternoon, the spring sun hung low above Chicago as Ethan Walker parked beside a neighborhood elementary school. The pickup truck that Victoria had silently judged the night before rattled softly as he turned off the engine. Children poured through the front doors carrying backpacks, art projects, and endless energy. Ethan checked the time, then smiled when he spotted a familiar blonde ponytail weaving through the crowd. "Daddy!" Sophie shouted. Her face lit up instantly. Ethan opened his arms just in time for her to run into them. "Hey, kiddo! You are 3 minutes early." "I know. That never happens. Do not get used to it." Sophie laughed as he lifted her backpack. Together they walked toward the truck while the sounds of dismissal echoed behind them. "How was school?" Ethan asked. "Mrs. Patterson says my science project might go to regionals." "That is impressive." "I know. Confident today, huh?" "I got it from you." Ethan shook his head, pretending to disagree. The two drove through tree-lined streets toward a small ice cream shop tucked between a bookstore and a family-owned bakery. Inside, employees greeted them by name. Not because Ethan was wealthy. Not because of any hidden status. Simply because they came often and treated everyone kindly. Sophie chose chocolate chip cookie dough. Ethan ordered black coffee. They settled into a booth near the window. "So," Sophie said between bites, "how was your date?" Ethan nearly laughed. "Straight to the hard questions? That means it was bad." "It was not terrible." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "That means it was bad." Ethan looked out the window for a moment. Pedestrians crossed the street beneath bright afternoon sunlight. Life moved calmly around them. "Sometimes people make decisions before they know enough about someone," he said. Sophie considered that carefully. "Like when kids thought Emma was mean because she never talked?" "Exactly. But she was just shy." "Right." Sophie nodded slowly. "So your date did not know enough?" Ethan smiled. "Something like that." Across town, Victoria sat inside a glass conference room on the 38th floor of Hayes Technologies. The city skyline stretched behind her like a postcard. Executives reviewed quarterly reports while numbers glowed across a presentation screen. Yet her attention kept drifting. "Victoria?" one of her directors asked. "Sorry," she replied quickly. "Continue." The meeting resumed, but her focus remained fractured. She told herself it was because the date had been disappointing. Nothing more. Later that evening, she joined two friends for dinner at an upscale rooftop restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. "So tell us about the mystery man," one friend said. Victoria rolled her eyes. "There is nothing to tell." "That bad? He seemed nice enough." "But—" Victoria took a sip of sparkling water. "No ambition. No presence. No real direction." Her friends exchanged knowing looks. "Sounds like a mismatch." "Exactly." The conversation moved on. The city lights reflected across the river below. Laughter drifted from nearby tables. Yet somewhere deep inside, a tiny discomfort remained. Not because she missed Ethan. Not because she regretted leaving. But because of how easily he had let her go. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan and Sophie sat on a park bench watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Sophie leaned against his shoulder. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "Mom used to say good people are easy to miss." Ethan looked toward the horizon. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and spring flowers. "Your mom was a very smart woman," he said quietly. And as the last sunlight faded across the city, either of them noticed a black Ferrari parked 2 blocks away, waiting silently beneath the gathering dusk. The truth rarely announces itself. More often, it waits quietly in plain sight while everyone looks somewhere else. 3 days passed. Chicago moved through its usual rhythm of morning traffic, crowded sidewalks, and glowing office towers reaching toward the clouds. Victoria Hayes buried herself in work. Investor calls. Strategy meetings. Product launches. Every hour of every day was scheduled with precision. Yet now and then, without warning, her thoughts drifted back to the man from the restaurant. Not because she regretted leaving. At least that was what she told herself. It was because his reaction had not matched her expectations. Most people tried to impress her. Some bragged. Others exaggerated. Ethan had done neither. He had simply accepted her decision and moved on. Late Friday afternoon, Victoria exited her headquarters and stepped into the cool spring air. Her assistant hurried beside her. "Your 6 o'clock dinner was moved to 7, she said. "That gives you a little extra time." Victoria nodded. "Good." As they approached the curb, a small crowd had gathered near the intersection. Several people were taking photographs. Others stood staring. "What is going on?" Victoria asked. Her assistant glanced across the street. "Looks like another luxury car event." Victoria followed her gaze. Parked along the block were vehicles so rare they looked almost unreal. A silver McLaren reflected the sunlight like liquid metal. Beside it sat a deep blue Ferrari with flawless lines and polished chrome. Further down the street stood a black Pagani that seemed more sculpture than automobile. A young man nearby shook his head in amazement. That collection has to be worth over $20 million. Maybe more, another replied. Victoria looked briefly before returning her attention to her schedule. Expensive cars had never impressed her. Success did. Discipline did. Results did. She stepped into her waiting vehicle and disappeared into downtown traffic. Across the city, Ethan Walker sat in the bleachers of Sophie's elementary school gymnasium. Colorful student artwork covered the walls. Folding chairs squeaked against the polished floor. Proud parents filled the room. Sophie stood near the front holding a science fair ribbon. First place, she announced proudly as she reached him afterward. I knew you could do it. You always say that. Because it is usually true. Sophie smiled. Can we celebrate? Absolutely. Pizza? You drive a hard bargain. They left together laughing. Outside, the parking lot was filled with ordinary vehicles. Minivans. Sedans. Pickup trucks. Nothing unusual. Yet a block away, inside a private climate-controlled showroom hidden behind an unmarked brick building, technicians carefully prepared several rare automobiles for an upcoming charity exhibition. One employee checked a clipboard. Has Mr. Walker approved the transport schedule? Another nodded immediately. This morning. All 27 cars? Everyone. The first employee whistled softly. Hard to believe he still drives that old truck. That is because you are looking at the truck. The second replied. The people who know him look at everything else. That evening, Victoria arrived at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. The skyline shimmered beyond the windows like scattered diamonds. As she reviewed notes for an upcoming partnership discussion, a headline flashed across a nearby television screen. Chicago Charity Auto Auction expected to break fundraising records. Images of rare supercars appeared across the screen. Victoria barely noticed. She returned to her documents. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan and Sophie shared a pepperoni pizza beneath warm restaurant lights. Sophie talked excitedly about school, friends, and future dreams. Ethan listened carefully, smiling often. Outside the window, city lights reflected across the pavement. And parked quietly beneath a nearby street lamp sat the same black Ferrari Victoria had seen earlier that day, waiting patiently for the man who had never once felt the need to mention that it belonged to him. The moment people stop looking at appearances is often the moment they finally see the truth. 1 week later, downtown Chicago buzzed with anticipation as collectors, investors, and automotive enthusiasts gathered inside the Grand Lakes Convention Center. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling. Spotlights reflected across polished chrome and flawless paint. The annual charity auto auction had become one of the city's most prestigious events, attracting influential guests from across the country. Victoria Hayes attended reluctantly. One of her corporate partners had purchased a sponsorship table and insisted she appear. As she entered the exhibition hall, conversations blended with soft piano music and the distant click of cameras. Rare vehicles filled the room like museum pieces. A vintage Ferrari sat beneath golden lighting. Nearby, a handcrafted Pagani drew a crowd 3 people deep. Impressive, right? Her business associate asked. Victoria nodded politely. Very. In truth, she was already thinking about the next morning's board meeting. Cars were not her passion. Results were. Numbers were. Growth was. She accepted a glass of sparkling water and followed the crowd toward the main stage where the evening's largest auction items would soon be introduced. Across the room, a black SUV quietly arrived through a private entrance. Ethan Walker stepped out wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. The same quiet confidence remained. The same calm expression. Yet the moment he entered, several event organizers approached him immediately. Good evening, Mr. Walker. We are honored you could make it. Everything is ready for tonight. Ethan shook hands, thanked them, and asked about the scholarship fund the event supported. He spent more time discussing students than automobiles. An hour later, guests filled their seats. The stage lights brightened. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and welcomed everyone. Applause echoed throughout the ballroom. Victoria glanced down at her phone while the opening remarks continued. Then she heard something that made her look up. "Before we begin," the host announced, "we would like to recognize the individual whose generosity made this year's record-breaking fundraising effort possible." A large screen illuminated behind him. Through donations, vehicle contributions, and scholarship funding, one person has helped raise more than $12 million for students across Illinois. The audience immediately began whispering. Victoria looked toward the stage. "Please join me in thanking Mr. Ethan Walker." For a brief moment, she thought she had heard the wrong name. Then she saw him. Ethan stood from a front-row VIP table. The entire ballroom rose in applause. Investors, executives, collectors, community leaders. Hundreds of people standing. Victoria stared in disbelief. Her business associate leaned closer. "You know Ethan Walker?" She could not answer. The screen behind the stage shifted to photographs of rare automobiles. Ferrari, McLaren, Pagani, one after another. "Many of tonight's featured vehicles come from the Walker collection," the host continued. "One of the most respected private collections in the country." The room applauded again. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. The cars. The ones outside the restaurant. The ones she had ignored. The ones everyone had admired. Suddenly, the memory returned with perfect clarity. Ethan sitting calmly across from her. Ethan smiling when she left. Ethan never mentioning any of it. Never correcting her assumptions. Never defending himself. As the applause continued, Ethan simply nodded and returned to his seat. No speech. No self-promotion. No attempt to impress anyone. The room slowly settled back into silence. But Victoria could not. Because for the first time since that night, she realized she had not walked away from a poor single father. She had walked away from a man who never needed her approval in the first place. The biggest surprises are rarely found in what people have. They are found in what people choose to walk away from. Long after the charity auction ended, Victoria remained awake in her high-rise apartment overlooking the city. The lights of Chicago stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, but her attention stayed fixed on a single name glowing across her laptop screen. Ethan Walker. She had expected a simple explanation. Instead, every article seemed to reveal another layer. Collector. Philanthropist. Investor. Entrepreneur. Community sponsor. The deeper she looked, the stranger the story became. There were photographs of him standing beside historic automobiles worth millions of dollars. There were interviews praising his charitable work. There were business publications describing him as one of the most successful private investors in the Midwest. Yet none of the headlines felt boastful. Most of them focused on scholarships, restoration programs, or local families he had helped. Victoria frowned. Something was missing. People with that level of success usually wanted recognition. Ethan seemed determined to avoid it. The next morning, she arrived at her office earlier than usual. Her assistant entered carrying a stack of reports. "You are here early. Could you find something for me?" Victoria asked. "Anything specific?" Victoria hesitated for a moment. "Background information on Ethan Walker." Her assistant raised an eyebrow. "The collector from the auction?" "Yes. I can do that." By noon, a folder sat on Victoria's desk. She opened it carefully. The first pages covered business history. 15 years earlier, Ethan had founded an automotive technology company focused on advanced engineering systems. The company grew rapidly before being acquired by a major manufacturer for an amount large enough to secure several lifetimes of wealth. Victoria leaned back slowly. That alone would have explained everything. Yet the next section surprised her more. Following the sale, Ethan had gradually stepped away from public life. Board memberships ended. Media appearances disappeared. Corporate leadership positions were declined. Instead, he focused on raising his daughter after the loss of his wife several years earlier. Victoria stared at the page. The room suddenly felt quieter. She remembered the way he had spoken about his daughter during their brief conversation. There had been warmth there. Pride. Purpose. She simply had not paid attention. Across town, Ethan spent his Saturday morning helping Sophie assemble a model bridge for school. Construction paper, glue sticks, and rulers covered the kitchen table. "It keeps leaning," Sophie complained. Ethan examined the structure. Maybe the foundation needs more support. That sounds like something adults say when they do not know the answer. Ethan laughed. You might be right. Sophie grinned and continued working. Sunlight poured through the windows. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the house. It was not a mansion. It was not extravagant. It was simply home. Later that afternoon, Victoria continued reading. She discovered that Ethan quietly funded dozens of educational programs throughout Illinois. He sponsored youth engineering competitions. He donated equipment to schools. He rarely attached his name to any of it. The more she learned, the more uncomfortable she became. Because none of these facts changed who Ethan was. They only revealed how quickly she had judged him. As evening settled over Chicago, Victoria closed the final page and stared out her office window. For the first time, she was no longer embarrassed that Ethan was wealthy. She was embarrassed that wealth had been the thing she noticed last. And somewhere across the city, completely unaware of her growing regret, Ethan sat beside Sophie on their back porch watching the sunset, content with a life he had never felt the need to explain. Regret has a strange way of growing. It rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in small moments, quiet realizations, and questions that refuse to disappear. During the following week, Victoria Hayes found herself noticing things she had ignored before. She noticed how often successful people talked about themselves. She noticed how many introductions depended on titles, awards, and net worth. Most of all, she noticed how different Ethan Walker had been. He had never mentioned a company. Never mentioned an investment portfolio. Never mentioned the collection that automotive magazines described as legendary. The memory bothered her more each day. One Tuesday afternoon, Victoria sat through a networking luncheon at a luxury hotel downtown. Around the table, executives exchanged stories about acquisitions, market share, and future expansion plans. Normally, she enjoyed these conversations. Today, however, they felt strangely hollow. One executive spent 15 minutes describing his latest vacation home. Another discussed a luxury yacht he planned to purchase. Victoria listened politely, but her mind drifted elsewhere. She remembered Ethan talking about his daughter. She remembered how his eyes had brightened when he mentioned raising her. There had been no performance in his words. No attempt to impress. Just sincerity. After the luncheon ended, Victoria made a decision she could not quite explain. Instead of returning to the office, she drove to one of the schools Ethan funded. The building was modest. Children played on the playground while teachers supervised nearby. A plaque near the entrance listed recent scholarship sponsors. Ethan's name appeared among them, but unlike the others, it was printed in the smallest possible lettering. Victoria stared at it for a moment. Most donors wanted visibility. Ethan seemed to prefer the opposite. Inside the administrative office, she introduced herself and asked about the scholarship program. The principal smiled immediately. Mr. Walker has helped a lot of families. You know him. Personally? Victoria asked. Very well. What is he like? The principal laughed softly. He never asks what a student can do for him. He only asks what they need. The answer stayed with Victoria all afternoon. Later that evening, Ethan attended one of Sophie's school events. Parents filled folding chairs while students presented projects and performances. Ethan sat in the third row, applauding every child with the same enthusiasm he showed for his daughter. When the event ended, several parents approached him. Not because he was wealthy. Most had no idea. They approached him because he volunteered, listened, and showed up when people needed help. Sophie walked beside him toward the parking lot carrying a small certificate. Did I do okay? She asked. Ethan smiled. You did great. Even the presentation? Especially the presentation. Sophie grinned proudly. As they reached the old pickup truck, she looked up at him. Dad? Yeah? Why do people always seem surprised when they find out things about you? Ethan paused before answering. The evening air was cool. Streetlights had begun to glow against the darkening sky. Because most people decide who someone is before they really know them. Sophie thought about that. Does that make you sad? Ethan opened the passenger door for her. Not really. Why not? He smiled gently. Because the people who matter eventually take the time to look deeper. Across the city, Victoria stood alone beside her apartment window. The lights of Chicago stretched for miles beneath the night sky. For the first time in years, she was not questioning a business decision. She was questioning her own judgment. And for the first time since she walked away from that restaurant table, she found herself wondering whether she had been given something rare and valuable, only to leave before she had taken the time to see it. Sometimes a single sentence can reveal more about a person's character than 1,000 pages of research. The following Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze moving through the city. Victoria Hayes had spent most of the week debating with herself. Every logical reason told her to move on. Every uncomfortable feeling told her she should not. By late morning, she finally did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She acted without a strategic plan. After several minutes of hesitation, she sent Ethan a message. It was short, simple, honest. I owe you an apology. To her surprise, a reply arrived less than an hour later. Thank you for saying that. No bitterness. No sarcasm. No attempt to make her feel worse. Just grace. The response somehow made her feel even more embarrassed. A few messages later, they agreed to meet for coffee the following afternoon. When Sunday arrived, Victoria found herself strangely nervous. She could negotiate billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. Yet walking into a neighborhood coffee shop felt far more intimidating. Ethan was already there when she arrived. He sat near a window, reading while a cup of coffee rested beside him. The moment he looked up, he smiled politely. Hi, Victoria. Hi. She sat down across from him. For a second neither spoke. The sounds of espresso machines and quiet conversations filled the space around them. Finally, Victoria took a breath. I was wrong. Ethan listened quietly. About what? About you. She lowered her eyes briefly. Actually, about a lot of things. Ethan remained silent, allowing her room to continue. I judged you within minutes. You did. And you knew it. I did. Victoria laughed softly despite herself. Why did you not say anything? Ethan looked out the window for a moment before answering. Because people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. The answer landed harder than she expected. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. I am sorry, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Thank you. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Less uncomfortable. More honest. Then the front door opened. Dad! Sophie called as she entered carrying a sketchbook almost as large as her backpack. Ethan's entire expression changed instantly. The reserved businessman disappeared. The father remained. Hey, kiddo. Sophie reached the table and noticed Victoria. Oh. Ethan smiled. Sophie, this is Victoria. Sophie extended her hand with surprising confidence. Nice to meet you. Victoria smiled and shook it. Nice to meet you too. Within minutes, Sophie was enthusiastically explaining a school project involving bridge design and environmental engineering. Victoria listened carefully. The girl's excitement was impossible to ignore. Dad helped me with the calculations, Sophie said proudly. But I still did most of the work. That sounds fair, Victoria replied. Sophie nodded. Dad always says people should earn things themselves. Then she paused. He also says money is useful, but character matters more. Victoria glanced toward Ethan. He looked mildly embarrassed. Sophie continued flipping through sketches. A lot of people think Dad cares about cars because of the collection. Collection? Victoria asked. The cars. Sophie shrugged. He likes them, but he likes helping students more. She returned to her drawings as if she had said nothing important. Yet Victoria felt something shift inside her. Because in that simple, unfiltered moment, she finally saw Ethan the way the people closest to him did. Not as a wealthy man. Not as an investor. Not as the owner of extraordinary things. But as a father whose greatest achievement had never been parked in a showroom. Real character is revealed when doing the right thing becomes more expensive than doing the easy thing. The days following their meeting passed more quickly than either Ethan or Victoria expected. They exchanged occasional messages. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. Simple conversations about work, school projects, books, and life. For the first time in years, Victoria found herself speaking to someone who seemed completely uninterested in status. It was refreshing. It was also unsettling. One Thursday morning, Victoria arrived at her office to discover a problem waiting for her. A major partnership opportunity had emerged. The agreement promised enormous growth, national exposure, and millions in future revenue. On paper, it looked perfect. By afternoon, however, details began to surface. The proposed partner wanted access to educational software programs that had been developed through a nonprofit initiative supporting underserved schools. Several of those programs overlapped with projects funded by Ethan's scholarship network. During the executive meeting, one board member leaned forward. "If we move quickly, we can secure exclusive rights before anyone objects." Another nodded. "The legal team believes it can be done." Victoria reviewed the documents silently. Weeks earlier, she probably would have approved the strategy without hesitation. It was legal. It was profitable. It was efficient. Yet something felt wrong. "How would this affect the schools currently using the program?" she asked. The room grew quiet. One executive cleared his throat. "They would likely face new licensing costs." "Higher costs?" "Most likely." Victoria looked around the conference table. No one seemed concerned. They saw numbers. Market share. Competitive advantage. For a moment, she remembered Sophie sitting in the coffee shop proudly describing her engineering project. She remembered Ethan asking students what they needed instead of what they could offer him. She remembered the principal's words. "He only asks what they need." Victoria closed the folder. "We are not doing this." Several executives exchanged confused glances. "Victoria, this could be worth tens of millions." "I know." "Then why walk away?" She took a slow breath. "Because success that hurts the people we claim to help is not success." The room fell silent. It was not the most profitable decision. It was simply the right one. That evening, Victoria left the office later than usual. The city glowed beneath a sky streaked with shades of orange and gold. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Ethan. "How was your day?" She smiled before typing a reply. "Complicated." A few minutes later they spoke by phone while she drove home. Ethan listened more than he talked. As always. When she explained the situation, he remained quiet for a moment. "You made a difficult choice," he finally said. "Maybe." "No," Ethan replied gently. "Definitely." Victoria felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. Not because he approved. Because he understood. Later that night, she stood beside her apartment window looking out across Chicago. For years she had measured success by growth charts, contracts, and quarterly reports. Yet somehow the decision she felt proudest of had earned her nothing at all. Except self-respect. And somewhere across the city, Ethan sat on his back porch while Sophie finished her homework nearby. As the evening breeze moved through the trees, he smiled quietly, unaware that the woman who had once judged him in minutes was slowly becoming someone entirely different. Some lessons arrive through success. The most important ones arrive through humility. Nearly a month after their first meeting, the city hosted another charity event, this time honoring community leaders and educational programs that had changed lives across Illinois. The venue was elegant but understated. Warm lights reflected across polished floors. Conversations drifted through the ballroom in calm waves. Teachers, business owners, donors, and families filled the room. Victoria Hayes stood near the entrance, greeting guests as one of the evening's sponsors. Yet despite the crowd, her attention kept drifting toward the parking area outside the large glass windows. It was the same location where everything had quietly begun. Not the same restaurant, but the same lesson. Appearances. Assumptions. Choices. A few minutes later, Ethan Walker arrived with Sophie by his side. Several guests immediately approached them. Educators thanked him for scholarship funding. Parents thanked him for opportunities their children had received. Students thanked him for believing in them. Ethan accepted every compliment with the same gentle smile, redirecting attention toward the programs rather than himself. Victoria watched from across the room. Weeks earlier she would have focused on his accomplishments. Now she noticed something else. The way he listened. The way he treated every person with equal respect. The way Sophie seemed completely secure beside him. During the evening, a presenter unexpectedly invited Victoria to the stage. She accepted politely and prepared to discuss educational partnerships. Then, standing beneath the lights, she paused. The prepared remarks suddenly felt incomplete. She looked out at the audience. then toward Ethan. "There is something else I would like to say tonight," she began. The room grew quiet. "A few weeks ago, I made a mistake." Several guests exchanged curious glances. Victoria smiled softly. "I met someone and decided who he was before I actually knew him." Silence settled across the ballroom. "I thought I was evaluating success. In reality, I was measuring the wrong things." Her voice remained calm. "Honest. The person I judged turned out to be generous, accomplished, and respected. But that is not what impressed me most. What impressed me most was his character." Across the room, Ethan lowered his eyes slightly, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. A few people smiled knowingly. Victoria continued. "The lesson was not about money. It was not about achievements. It was about taking the time to see people clearly." When she finished, the room responded with warm applause. Not loud. Not dramatic. Genuine. Later that evening, guests slowly began leaving. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Outside, a familiar row of extraordinary automobiles sat beneath the glow of street lamps. Ferrari. McLaren. Pagani. Beautiful machines admired by everyone who passed. Victoria stepped into the cool night air and found Ethan standing near the parking area. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan smiled. "Quite a speech." Victoria laughed softly. "I meant every word." A comfortable silence followed. The kind that no longer needed explanation. Finally Ethan looked toward the cars, then back at her. "Funny thing," he said. "Those cars got a lot of attention." Victoria followed his gaze briefly before returning it to him. "I know. And?" She smiled. "This time, they were the least interesting thing I saw." Ethan laughed quietly. Sophie rolled her eyes as if she had already heard enough grown-up conversations for one evening. Above them, the Chicago skyline glowed against the night sky. Around them, the city continued moving as it always had. Yet for three people standing beneath those lights, something important had changed. Not because someone had become richer. Not because someone had become more successful. But because respect had replaced judgment, understanding had replaced assumption, and a second chance had quietly found its way into all of their lives. And in that peaceful moment, surrounded by the silence that follows truth, nothing needed to be said at all.